Hello, my name is Mark Renz. I'm an extension specialist and professor at UW-Madison, and I'd like to talk to you today about garlic mustard and provide you with a brief overview of how to identify it, a little bit about its biology, and really focus in on some of the management options that are available to you. There's a lot of information available on our website, which is listed below, and you can always email me at the address. Well, first off, why do we care about garlic mustard? Well, it is a non-native invasive plant to the United States. Here is a list of all the states in the Midwest where it is listed as invasive, so they all feel that it causes some negative impact to their states. And actually 3 of the states in orange have actually regulated this species. So there's lots of concerns about some of the impacts or potential impacts that garlic mustard can pose to our states and our habitats. And this is an example of what some of the worst case scenario situations are. We can get these near monotypic stands where it's dominated by garlic mustard, very few other plants growing in the spring, and there's a cascade of effects that can range from competition with early ephemeral spring species to actually impacting regeneration of some of our hardwood trees. And so this is why we're really concerned about garlic mustard. And it's widespread. It's been present for decades in the United States. Here's a map of where we see it just in the Great Lakes region. And as you can see, we have thousands upon thousands of observations, highly widespread and really dominates many of our areas. Thus, it's received a lot of attention over the last several decades. So where does it invade? It actually historically has been really isolated to forested areas, particularly shaded areas as we see in the picture on the right. And this is still remains its dominant habitat that it invades. But as we're seeing now, it's starting to evolve and move out from some of those areas and starting to infest other areas as well. And this has been happening in other states for quite some time, but in Wisconsin, while we historically have seen it in these forested areas, now we're starting to see it invade some wetland habitats, as you can see in the upper right, some roadside full sun grassland habitats, as you can see here in the center, and we're even seeing it really commonly in some urban areas. This is a flower bed in the middle of a garden in a county park. So we can get it now invading a wide range of habitats, not just exclusively in forested areas like it was in the past. So what is garlic mustard and what's its growth process? It's what we call a biennial plant. And what that means is we get seedlings that emerge in late March to early April. There's a picture in the lower left-hand corner of what seedlings look like. Very few plants are emerging at this time frame. Those seedlings will become rosettes in the summer of that first year, and those rosettes will persist throughout the spring of the second year. And rosettes, if you don't know, are just a combination of leaves with no stem. These rosettes then in the second year, in late April to May, will form a stem, as you can see here, and will bolt, is what we call. And those bolting plants will produce flower buds that will eventually flower in June in Wisconsin, producing these very clear, easy to identify flowers that will produce these distinct siliques or fruits in late June and early July of the second year. And then this plant will die by late summer, and the process will start over the following spring. We will get seedlings that will emerge. So it's a 2-year process for this plant to complete its life cycle and go from seed to seedling to a fruiting plant that produces seed. While we talk about this life cycle, we have to realize that since this life cycle spans over 2 years, we can easily get multiple different phases present at once in the environment. So here's a picture of garlic mustard seedlings present in May, as well as some rosette plants and some plants that are just beginning to bolt. So we get a wide range of these stages that are present at one time in the environment. Therefore, it's really important to learn to identify each one of these stages. They have some key aspects that are present. For the rest of this presentation, I'm really going to focus on rosettes, flowering, and fruiting plants and how to identify and what some of those key characteristics are. Seedlings can be really challenging to identify, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. The one comment I will make is in late March, early April, there's very few other plants that are germinating, and so this is a good indicator in itself. That first true leaf also can look quite similar to some of those later emerging plants. So first, let's look at some identifying characteristics. Let's look at the leaves. That's probably our first stop when we want to try and identify this plant. I'm going to differentiate rosette leaves and flowering plant leaves because there are some distinctions on how they look a little bit different. Those rosettes can be anywhere from 2 inches to 4 inches tall, and really they have these heart-shaped leaves which are quite distinct. You will notice that they do have this toothed margin that can be quite variable. And when you crush the leaves, you'll actually get a distinct onion or garlicky smell when it's crushed. I can see a couple pictures in the upper right-hand corner of what those heart-shaped rosette leaves look like. They often can also look fairly crinkled because of the veination. But as that plant begins to produce a stem and flower, some of these leaves can change their appearance quite dramatically. They will still have that tooth margin and still will have an onion garlicky smell when crushed. But what we see as those leaves are born closer to where those flowers and flower buds are, they become much more triangular in shape, and they are born alternately on the stem where we have no stem in those rosette leaves, so can't distinguish that. And they can be anywhere from 2 to 3 inches wide, getting smaller as you get upwards along the stem. So that's a really good identifying characteristics of the leaves on how to differentiate these plants. And when they flower, these second-year plants are quite distinct. They produce an inflorescence that's anywhere from 1 to 4 feet tall. I've occasionally seen plants taller than 4 feet. Each individual flower will have 4 petals that are relatively small, and you can see how they're born at the tips of the growing points. And as you can see to the right, as that plant starts to produce fruit, and we'll talk about the fruit in a second, we will get flowering that will still occur in the tips. And so you can have fruit and flowers that are present, particularly in late June in Wisconsin too. So another good identifying characteristics. And very few other white flowering plants are present in forest understories too. So this is a really good identifying characteristic. And when plants produce fruit, they produce these slender capsules that we call calyx. They're actually quite long, 1 inch to 2.5 inches long, and as they mature, will contain a single row of black seeds in that long fruit pod. So that's fairly distinct. There's just a few other mustards that you might get confused with those calyx, but I think some of these characteristics will help us in differentiating between those mustards and garlic mustard. Often the root, if you pull up the root, will have a bend in it or an S-shaped curve, and so that can be a good confirming characteristic as well that you can use for identification. Now there are a few lookalikes that we do get some questions about, and so I want to just briefly go over what some of those are. That can vary based on your region. One of the common ones is creeping Charlie, which is a common understory and garden weed. I think that one can easily be differentiated from garlic mustard, and then it first off has a stem which creeps, and so it has this creeping stem. And if you look closely at that stem, you'll see leaves that are opposite, not alternate, as you can see here too. So those are two really good characteristics to differentiate between creeping Charlie. And some other people occasionally will confuse some of our violets, and we have a wide range of violets that are present in our understories of forests and in some of our full sun habitats. I think some of the main differences are it never produces leaves on the stems of the violets, and often you'll see a pointed tip on the rosette leaves, and when you crush those leaves you don't get that garlicky odor. Obviously when they flower they look incredibly different, so that would be an easy way to differentiate between violets and garlic mustard. So now I'm going to transition into talking about some of the tips for management. I want to highlight this by saying we're blessed that many control options are fairly effective to highly effective. So when we pick our management options, we really need to think carefully about which ones fit our situation and realize that some of these management options work best when garlic mustard is at very specific stages. So we need to think about that. And as I'll talk about some of the other plant species that are present. I think the other big point that we need to think about is before we start management, we have to have a plan in place. You know, these garlic mustard infestations can be really complex and can span a range of habitats. And so having a plan in place up front before we start management efforts can really help us in being efficient and getting the desired goal that we want. Really, how to develop a plan is beyond the scope of this, but I'll kind of highlight a few simple points and aspects that we need to think about. And if we're trying to get rid of garlic mustard in this site, really that plan should focus on preventing the production of seed, because that's what's sustaining that population over time. Those seeds are in the seed bank. Those seeds are coming in off of site. So we need to identify where those seeds are coming in from and where those seeds are in the environment and prevent production so that we can eliminate the presence of the seed in the environment. And that's going to take multiple years in most situations. Really, when we develop this plan, we really need to do a lot of work before we start. We need to get a really good understanding of where the infestation is, both on the property you're targeting and where it's coming in from. Because if you can't manage the source of that population, you're going to continually get reinfestation and have to manage that over time. And that's going to get frustrating if you're trying to get to the eradication standpoint. You also need to understand some of your site-specific restrictions. Some sites you may be able to burn, some sites you may be able to use certain herbicides, some sites you may not. You really need to understand what those restrictions of those sites are, and also what are some of the sensitive species that you really want to protect in the understory as well. And then the final thing that I think is really critical is you need to understand what resources you have available as a manager to help you in this battle against garlic mustard. Some people might have a slew of volunteers. People might have access to professionals. You might have a budget for this, or you might not. It might just be a one-person crew. You really need to assess that and use that information in picking some of your management techniques. Now, jumping into some management, I think I pulled together this table to kind of highlight the different ranges of techniques that we have. We can utilize hand pulling, mowing, prescribed fire, and I'm really going to focus on spring prescribed fire for these woodlands, but there's other timings that can be successful. And we have a range of herbicides that we can use in herbicide methods. IPT stands for individual plant treatment or spot treatment, or we can broadcast these herbicides. And the key points I want to make is that these tools are effective on different life stages of garlic mustard when you apply them. So for example, if we were to use prescribed fire in the spring or herbicides, we're going to get really good control on seedlings. But hand pulling and mowing really isn't that effective. It's going to miss those because the seedlings are so low to the ground, whereas hand pulling just isn't realistic for the seedlings because there's just such a carpet of those species. So as you can see, I have the effective ones in green, the non-effective ones in red, and kind of the ones that are moderately effective yellow. So as you can see, really we're targeting in hand pulling when those plants are bolting or flowering. Hand pulling, if we're removing it, we can use for fruiting plants. Spring prescribed fire or burning, we're really only targeting the seedlings. We may get some of those rosettes. We may control depending on the time of when we do it and the fire intensity, and I'll talk more about that. And herbicides, we actually have a much wider range of when we can control them and effectively control garlic mustard. I'll talk about the question mark at fruiting plants at the end of this presentation. But what I want to emphasize here is while we can use this information to highlight which technique we want to use at what time, we also have to consider the desirable plants in the understory. Because while we can maximize the timing of our tool to maximize control, several of these tools are going to have the potential for some non-target plant injury. Now, we can mitigate that sometimes by looking at the timing of when we apply that, but I want to emphasize that mowing and herbicides, particularly broadcast herbicides specifically, have the potential for really high non-target plant injury, depending on the time when we apply those. And we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. So wanted to talk about the different control methods and kind of the pluses and minuses of each one. I want to emphasize that I'm not going to be talking about biological control in this presentation. Why not? Is because it's not registered for use in the United States. There are no biological agents that you can purchase and release legally. There is a permit in place, and in Canada they are conducting this. This may be an option in the future. It is going through the registration process and has been approved by the technical advisory group called TAG, but is awaiting further regulatory approval. So I'm just not going to talk about it. This may be an option in the future, but it's not an option at the current state. So I'm going to skip this control method. A lot of people have historically relied on hand pulling garlic mustard plants, and it's very effective. The best timing is clearly in the spring when plants are bolting or flowering. And as you can see, it can be really effective if done at the correct stage. We have lots of volunteer groups that are trained to do this and can literally pull out hundreds of pounds of garlic mustard from a forest, as you can see in some of these pictures. And so really the advantages are it's easy to do, it's easy to train people to do and get people out there to do it, and I think they feel good about doing this. Some of the disadvantages, though, of hand pulling is that whenever you pull a plant, you're creating some type of disturbance in the soil. And there's some suggestions that that increase in soil disturbance may have some negative impacts on the forest. And it's also increasing the potential for other non-desirable plants to get established in that disturbed framework. You also have to be careful on how you dispose of those populations. Some of those might produce viable seeds. You need to make sure and manage that those pulled plants carefully. If there's fruit present, you need to make sure and put it in a location where that seed won't spread. And I think the biggest disadvantage to this management method is that we've heard lots of volunteers that have gone out for multiple years to hand pull garlic mustard populations just to come back to see more and more and more of it. And they really can get discouraged and just kind of give up on some of these events and attempts to control. And so this is something that I think we need to keep in mind and really want to maximize the positive aspects of getting people to volunteer for invasive plant control. Mowing is another aspect that has been used to a certain degree and has had some level of success. Really, the timing for mowing is similar to hand pulling, although we don't recommend mowing when those saliques or fruit are starting to mature. So really the best times when it's bolting or just beginning to flower is when we recommend mowing. Again, it's really effective at preventing seed production. It can limit it, if not eliminate it. And you can use equipment, not such as this equipment here, but such as a weed whacker or string trimmer, and limit some of the injury to the desirable plants. I think some of the disadvantages is we have heard some reports that plants can resprout after mowing, particularly if you're mowing it when plants are bolting, and they may still be able to resprout and produce some flowers and potentially some seed. We're not sure how viable that seed is, and it's almost certainly going to be a much lower number than if we did nothing, but there is some potential for some viable seed production. I think in some cases the window for treatment timing can be short, from bolting to flowering to fruit can in some cases be 2 to 3 weeks, so we need to be conscious of that. And I think the other big issue with mowing is we have to haul this equipment through the woods, and hauling anything through the woods can be a challenge because of it getting snagged on trees and branches and other things too. So it may have some limited windows where it would be effective. A lot of people are interested in using fire for managing garlic mustard. Fire can be applied at a wide range of different timings, and really the biggest benefit is really targeting the seedlings. So if seedlings are present and small, we've heard reports of high levels of control, near 100% control of seedling to very, very young rosettes. The challenge, though, is some of those rosettes that are in their second year may survive those, and likely a large proportion of them will survive 30, 50, 80%. But the level of survival is going to depend upon the heat of the fire too. So I think it's a good tool to be looking at and utilized. It's really effective on seedlings. I would not expect 100% control of rosettes, so we're going to need to go back and manage those rosettes that are missed in some of those fires. And again, it depends on the heat of those fires. Some disadvantages that I'd point out is that there is some suggestion that this fire may promote future germination in the future, so you may get a second flush after the fire of seedlings. Some more research needs to document that. And really, we're not controlling those rosettes, and so if you have some survived, you're going to need to go out and control those with other techniques to prevent seed production. I think a final disadvantage is you're going to need to have some advanced training to conduct these tools and this technique. I will say that others have used a propane torch to do this in a spot treatment level, and that can work really well as well. Again, expect less than 100% control on those rosettes and plan on them needing to be revisited as well. And then finally, I'm going to talk about herbicides, and really herbicides can be an effective tool. The use of herbicide is specific to the product you're using and the active ingredient, the timing of when you use it, and even the rates. And we're going to get into some, but not all of those details. I think there's a little bit more flexibility on when you can apply these herbicides. Some of the disadvantages come into the selectivity on some of the desirable plants in the understory. So I think the big advantages of this tool is that it can be really, really effective. We can get high levels of control consistently across a wide range of environmental conditions. And compared to, particularly we have large infestations, it can be really cost effective compared to hand pulling and others if you're paying people to do that, or even mowing. Some of the disadvantages, however, are the potential for non-target injury to some of the desirable herbaceous plants that are present. And so how do we make these applications so we minimize that non-target injury, or do we care about that non-target injury? Some people may have monocultures where there is so desirable plants. And then, we highly recommend that there's some sort of training. So the challenge with using herbicides is really trying to figure out which herbicide to use. We're fortunate that there's many products that are registered and effective for use. We can see here a table from one of my publications that's listing some of the ones that we've experimented with, but it can really be challenging to figure out the best fit for you. You can see you need to really dive into the details, such as what rate do we want to apply them at? Are we broadcasting it or spot treating it? When is the application timing that's best for that product? And then what are the potential injuries and residual activities if we apply some of these herbicides? And you can see there's a lot of variability depending on the product that we utilize in some of these answers. So we really need to do our research when using herbicides. But although there's a lot that are available and registered, there really are about 5 products that I would characterize as widely used that are listed below here. Glyphosate, that one of the trade names is Roundup, is probably the most widely used product. Very effective on emerged vegetation, post-emergent, but doesn't have any residual activity, which is one of the main reasons that we utilize it, although it is non-selective. If you have grasses present in your environment, triclopyr 2,4-D or metsulfuron are probably better choices. All of these are very effective at controlling garlic mustard, and some may have some slight to moderate residual activity but be safe to those grasses. So those are ones that we would really want to look to if we had grasses present that we wanted to keep. Then we also have products that are registered for forestry use, such as AUS, sulfametron, and this product is really great because it can have up to a year of residual activity for those hard to reach areas that you don't want to visit, and you can utilize this product and be effective at getting some long-term control. So lots of products are available. These are ones you really should look at and evaluate. And really what I recommend if you're looking at using herbicides is you pick up a fact sheet from a reliable expert or expert organization and read those fact sheets in detail to help in the selection process. On the left is our fact sheet that has some detailed information. There's another one by USDA that we were involved in writing, but there's many, many others from other groups and organizations. So I highly recommend that you read some of those and then contact your local experts to get some advice on selecting the right one if you have questions, because there's lots of details involved in this selection process. But that being said, most people rely on glyphosate, or one of the trade names is Roundup, and it's really effective on garlic mustard. This is a study from the early 2000s by colleagues in Ohio, and really what they showed is applications of glyphosate broadcasted in a 1 to 2% solution, depending on the active ingredient in the product, can give high levels of effective control if applied in the autumn, in the spring, and even in the winter. Well, you may be wondering, how the heck do they apply it in the winter? Well, they waited for a time frame when there was no snow on the ground, and believe it or not, those rosettes remain green. And if you can get a window in the middle of winter where there's no snow on the ground, those green rosettes can absorb herbicide and you can get effective control. Although you can see the numbers can in some years be a little bit more variable. It's going to be temperature dependent. So glyphosate does work well and give us high levels of control. But I want to kind of highlight some work done from Wisconsin, that we've done from Wisconsin, kind of show you some of the nuances of this, because not only do we need to think about the timing to apply garlic mustard, we need to think about what the goals of our land are and what the impact is going to be to some of those desirable plants as well. So this is some work by Adam Voth and Vijay Pandian in Extension. I want to highlight and thank them for this efforts. I'm going to show you a series of pictures that we did on some studies where we applied glyphosate at 2 timings in the spring and 2 timings on the fall, just to highlight some of the differences that we can see. And so relate all these future pictures to the untreated control that you can see in this image. We see lots of garlic mustard near monotypic stands. Well, we can go in the early spring, as you can see to the right, and spray garlic mustard, and then we can come back in June or July in the middle of summer in these forested areas, and what we can see is we get really good results. If we get an early spring application after the seedlings and the rosettes are present, we can essentially eliminate all those, and we have some other plant species that are filling in and filling in some of the herbaceous canopy. Those will have that entire year to flower, grow, produce seed hopefully, and increase their competitive abilities when garlic mustard comes back, because there is a seed bank in this situation. Let's contrast that if we apply later in the spring, in May, after those desirables have emerged. We can go in and we can control and remove both those seedlings and rosettes, but as a result, as you can see in those late spring applications, we essentially with glyphosate end up with no plant species present, or very few, by late summer. And in this case, even though this was a spot treatment, since we had such a high density of garlic mustard, we essentially killed everything that was present there too. So that spring timing can be a critical phase in seeing what you get that survives, that's desirable in that forest understory. Now let's contrast that with a fall application, either early or late in the season. Well, we saw with the fall applications, believe it or not, we did control all the rosettes that were going to flower, but what happened is we controlled all those rosettes that were going to flower the next year, which resulted in a large level of garlic mustard seedling germination, and those seedlings turned into rosettes that essentially outcompeted all the desirable vegetation, as you can see in this picture here too. So while we have essentially no flowering garlic mustard, we still have a highly competitive amount of garlic mustard that's preventing some of the desirable plants in that forest understory from being established. So the key point I'm trying to make is timing matters. Timing not only matters for control of garlic mustard, but it also matters for obtaining desirable plant cover. Because of these results, many of our applications, we're really recommending our early spring applications before those desirable understory plants emerge, because we can control the seedling garlic mustard plants as well as those plants that are going to flower, as we see in this picture. Late spring timings also work, but we're going to have less of the desirable plants present, especially if we have lots of garlic mustard where we're putting a lot of herbicide on the landscape. And while the fall methods are effective, we end up with these seas of garlic mustard, so we would have to come in the next fall and control those to prevent seed production. So we really like these spring applications because we can get 2 years of control and prevent seed production in those cases as well. And if we can go early enough, we can result in some desirable plants. So many of those, that previous experiment was really focused on non-residual products that just have post-emergence activity on garlic mustard, and there are several products that actually have significant residual activity, and the big question is, what's the fit for that, for using them to manage garlic mustard? What I mean by residual activity is not only do these products have post-emergence activity that can control emerged garlic mustard plants, but it also persists in the soil for a specific amount of time, and the soil residual activity prevents the emergence or germination of plants that have yet to emerge. And really we have 3 products that we're really looking at for effective garlic mustard residual activity: metsulfuron, trade name Escort; imazapic, trade name Plateau; and sulfametron, trade name Oust. And all these products have very high levels of post-emergence activity, but also will prevent the germination and establishment of new seedlings of garlic mustard for months, even up to a year after application, depending upon the rate and the environmental conditions. So typically with these products, what we're doing is applying them in the fall or spring, and that's going to control the emerged vegetation, and then the residual activity will prevent future seedlings from emerging. The real benefit of these is that besides a high level of control, it's registered for use in a lot of different habitats where garlic mustard grows. And this picture just kind of highlights the type of control we can expect. These applications were made in early April. This picture was taken at the end of June, and you can see we have 100% control of garlic mustard. No seedlings have reinfested this site at all. So while it's effective at garlic mustard, the big challenge is how do we deal with the desirable plants, particularly the broadleaf plants, because these products tend to have residual activity on a wide range of broadleaf plants, and we get limited to no emergence for 6 months to potentially even a year after treatment, depending on the product and the rate. While some of these are safe to grasses, particularly Escort or Metsulfuron, others have activity on those grasses as well, and so we can really expect limited desirable plants. So really it's a challenge to find the fit for these areas. I think that where we have really dense populations, where we really don't have any desirable herbaceous plants, and we're really focused on woody plant regeneration and the health of the woody plants in the forest, and aren't really concerned about the herbaceous plants, is where these are a good fit. Maybe remote areas that are hard areas to get back to, and we want to get multiple years of control out of one treatment. So we've kind of talked about some of the general aspects of herbicides, and we've talked about which herbicide gives us the best level of control. But I just want to point out, to remind you as listeners, that our ultimate goal is to prevent seed production, and while we want to prevent the cover of garlic mustard, even our herbicides that weren't particularly effective, when we applied them in the spring to plants that were going to flower, we prevented seed production. 90 to 100% seed production was eliminated, and in almost all cases we had close to 100%. So remember that that's our ultimate goal. If we can prevent seed production and repeatedly do that until that seed bank is depleted, we can have successful control of garlic mustard. And so let's remember that in this aspect. Even if we don't get 100% control of the foliage, as long as we prevent seed production long term, that's a good thing too, because these plants, as you see here, will die. They will not regrow the next year. Okay, so now I want to revisit this table where we talked about the various life stages and which techniques are effective. And what I really want to do is focus in on this question mark. For several years now, myself and colleagues have gotten this question of, oh shoot, I missed this window and I want to control garlic mustard with herbicides, but I'm already starting to see some fruit present on the plant. Can I still spray those, and will it work or not? And we didn't really have any data to answer this question, and so we finally got some colleagues together and decided to answer this question. Are herbicides effective if we apply them to the foliage when fruit are present? So one of my staff members, Leo Roth, and myself did 2 locations in Wisconsin, and had a colleague in University of Illinois Extension, Christopher Evans, that did some work in Illinois to answer this question. Essentially what we did is we had plots at 3 different locations over 2 years, and we compared the effectiveness of Garlon to Roundup. The active ingredients would be triclopyr versus glyphosate, to an untreated control. We applied these just when those petals dropped and those fruit were starting to elongate, as you could see in that picture. And then we evaluated not only how effective these treatments were at killing garlic mustard and controlling it, but also on how many seed were produced per plant, and were those seed viable or not, which is really the long-term goal, as you may remember. So the first question is what kind of control did we get? Well, we got actually good to excellent control with garlic mustard. Glyphosate worked excellent, and the triclopyr products were good to very good at killing those plants, as you can see in this picture. So the question, we're killing these plants, but as you can see, if you look closely, we can see that there are some fruits that are present, and we were able to collect some seed, as you'll see in the next slide. And so the big question is, how many seed were produced, and how many of those seeds were viable? And so this is the beauty of having a lot of labor on our hands. We were able to count those seeds and estimate the amount of viability of those seeds that were present. And so this is what I'm showing you on this graph here. We have each site evaluated separately, and what we can see on the y-axis here, we have the number of viable seed produced per plant. So we can see an untreated plant can produce anywhere from 300 to 1,300 viable seeds per plant, so lots of seeds. And if we apply either Garlon or glyphosate or triclopyr, we can get high levels of reduction in the number of viable seed, well below the untreated plants at each location. But what I want to emphasize is we are still getting some viable seed production. And the level of viable seed was variable. In one site here in Illinois, we had very little, if any, viable seed. In this Fitchburg location in southern Wisconsin, we had quite a low number, but not a non-zero number. And in this location, we had glyphosate had numerically a little bit more than triclopyr, but we did see some viable seed. So while we are getting a large-scale reduction in viable seed, we are not eliminating viable seed, and therefore we can use this as a control method, but this is not our probably ideal control method we want to utilize. This is kind of a last resort if we miss that window. Still try and make those applications before those plants flowering, either to rosettes or early in the spring to bolting plants if at all possible. Okay, so we've talked a lot about these different herbicides and the effectiveness of these herbicides. So how do I go about selecting an appropriate herbicide for garlic mustard? Well, we're fortunate that a lot of options are available, but we got to consider a lot of things. And so I just want to hammer home some of the things to think about when picking a herbicide. First off, is it effective? What level of control do I want? And is this herbicide I want to use effective? If it's effective, how long will it work for? Does it have residual activity in the soil or not? And when do I want to apply it, and at what rate to maximize control? That's really important information to have available. Then we need to think about, okay, if I want to use this herbicide, is it legal to use it in the habitat I'm interested in? Different products have different restrictions that are available to them, and so you really need to read the label, be familiar with what those restrictions are. Then thirdly, you need to think about, well, what are some of the desirable plants that I have present in this system? And is my application method going to impact those desirable plants? And if so, for how long? If I apply a residual product, is there potential to impact later emerging species, and for how long? And is there something I can do to minimize that impact? Can I apply it at a time frame or reduce the rate to minimize some of that impact? So those are things you need to think about. Often those are hard questions to answer, but I still encourage you to think about it. Spot treatment, treating at timings when desirable plants aren't there, can be really effective techniques to minimize some of these impacts. And then finally, like, well, if I plan on doing something in the future, like planting other species, will this have an impact on the success of that? Again, other things to think about. And then I always like to remind people to think about the cost. A lot of people don't think about this, and some of these can be quite expensive. Sometimes some of these side methods can be more cost effective than doing some of the manual labor methods as well, depending on your labor pool, if they're volunteers or not. So these are all things you need to think about when making any type of management decision, really. And this is really why we encourage you to consult an expert if you have questions on how to move forward with a decision process in management. Okay, so kind of sum things up with respect to management, and really to kind of hone in on some of the key aspects you need to think on when managing garlic mustard. First off, you need to think about the goal. What is our goal in managing garlic mustard? Is to prevent seed production and also to prevent seed from getting into that site from an external source. If we can do that for multiple years, we're going to see a dramatic reduction in garlic mustard populations. But if we can't find the source of where that seed is coming in, we can do the best job on the land we own, but we're still going to get deposition coming in off-site. And a great example is if you have a riverbed that's covered with garlic mustard that flows into your property, you need to control that garlic mustard on that riverbed or that riverine area, because you're going to get a new deposition of seeds every year from that river and that floodplain environment that's going to require that you're going to need to control that continually unless you control the source of that infestation. While we have a wide range of control options available, we're going to have better success if we're controlling populations where there's just a few small populations of newer plants versus widespread populations. Why is that? We have less seeds in the seed bank. We have other plants present that can be competitive and compete with those. So we have a better chance of success. So we encourage you to start in those areas where the populations are just spreading and then work your way back into those other areas. You'll see a lot larger success and get a lot less frustrated at the results. Some of those dense populations we can go in and get control, but we just don't see any desirable stuff coming back. Again, we are blessed. There are a range of techniques that are effective. We just need to figure out how we're going to use these techniques to optimize our control. And we really need to dig into the details of each method, thinking about when to apply it, how I apply it, what the impacts and costs are going to be as well. And again, hopefully some of these resources like this presentation are going to be a good start to helping you understand some of those details. So that's my conclusion. I want to thank you for listening to this presentation, and I want to leave you with a list of some resources where you can get some additional information on garlic mustard and other invasive species. And I want to just leave you with this message, is that we can be successful. We can recover sites that are loaded with invasive species and maintain ecosystem health and productivity, as you can see in this picture on Picnic Point, which was loaded with some invasive woody species. And when they were removed and controlled, we saw the return of trout lily and many other beautiful, desirable plants. So there can be success, and I encourage you to be diligent about this and work carefully to maintain some of our beautiful conservation areas that we hold to Wisconsin, the Great Lakes, and beyond.